Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, 16a of Maseches Brachos, and we are starting 6 lines from the bottom of the page, where the Gemara says, well, first it quotes the Mishnah, Chasan Pater Mikriya Shema. Towards the end of the line, it says that a Chasan, a groom, is exempt from Kriya Shema, from reciting Shema on the night of his wedding. Why? So we'll see in a moment. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa, B'shiftecha b'veisecha. In the Shema it says that you should v'dibarta bam, and you should speak of these words, B'shiftecha b'veisecha, when you are sitting in your house, as opposed to what? So says the Gemara, says the brisa, Prat le'osek b'mitzvah, as opposed to somebody who is osek b'mitzvah, they're involved in a mitzvah. If somebody is involved in a mitzvah, so then they're exempt from reciting Shema. Then the pasuk continues, the verse continues, says, V'lechtecha v'derech, and when you're going on the way, you should also say Shema. What is that coming to exclude? As opposed to Prat l'chasan. That comes to exclude a chasan, a groom, who is also involved in a mitzvah. The groom is performing on the night of his wedding, or attempting to perform, I guess you could say perform, that's a whole discussion, but pru'urvu, to be fruitful and multiply. He's doing a mitzvah, and so he's also exempt when he's osik, when he's involved in thinking about that mitzvah, preparing himself for it, he is exempt from reciting Shema. Mikan amru, now based on this they said, Hakones es ha-besula, pater. One who is marrying a besula, a virgin, is exempt. But if she's a widow, so then he is still obligated in Shema. The difference apparently is how much thought has to go into the preparations to have relations with the woman. If she's a virgin, so that's more of a I don't know what to call it a process, but it's something that he's thinking about what's involved in that, as opposed to somebody who's a widow, who's already been married, she's no longer a virgin. It's not as much thought that he puts into what he's going to be involved in the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply. Now, ask the Gemara, my mashma, where is it implied that a chasan would be exempt? So, Amar Papa ki derech. So, it's like the way it says, B'lechtecha v'derech, when you're going on the way. And ma derech rishus. Just like when you're going on the way, it's optional, it's something that's optional. Afachanami rishus, so here too, it's the obligation to say Shema is only where you're involved in something optional, and things that are optional. But when you're involved in a mitzvah, so then you are exempt. So ask the Gemara, who says that B'lechtecha v'derech, when you're going on the way, means you're going to do something optional, and that's where we say you have to say Shema. Milo askinan, aren't we dealing dekazal l'dvar mitzvah? Maybe it's talking about where he's going to do a mitzvah, and even still, Amar Rachmana Likri. The Torah says to read the Shema. Maybe B'lechtecha v'derech means you're going on the way to do a mitzvah, and yet you still have to say Shema. Says the Gemara, no. Imkain le'makra b'leches. If it was talking about where you're going to do a mitzvah, it would have, even where you're going to do a mitzvah, it would have said b'leches b'derech, in going on the way, but it wouldn't have said you're going. My b'lechtecha, what does it mean, you're going on the way? As if it's like, you're the possessive, you're going. Shma mina b'leches didachu demechayaves. What we see from there is that it's when you're going, when you're going for yourself, for something optional, for something for you, so then it says, you should read it, you should read Shema, b'lechtecha v'derech, when you're going on the way. Hada mitzvah petiras. But that teaches you that, as opposed to if you're doing a mitzvah, you're going for Hashem, you're going for a sacred mission, or you're involved in a mitzvah, so then you are pater, you're exempt. So, Ihachi, ask the Gemara, top of the next page, if that's true that when you're involved in a mitzvah you're exempt, Ma'irya hakones asabasula, why does the Brachos say specifically, I already explained this, but why does it say specifically when you're marrying a virgin that you're exempt? Afilu kones asalmana nami. So even if you're marrying a widow, you should also be exempt. You're involved in a mitzvah. So answers the Gemara, hacha tarid v'hacha lo tarid. Now, one of them, you're tarid, your thoughts are heavy. He's marrying a virgin, like I said before. He's thinking about what that entails. So then he's involved in a mitzvah, and he's thinking about it. So then he's exempt. But if he's marrying a widow, he doesn't have to think as much about it. So then he is not exempt. Now, I should note that there's a basic question going back to the Brisa, which is the Brisa said that it said b'shivtecha b'veisecha, when you're sitting in your house, then you have to say Shema, as opposed to if you're involved in a mitzvah. And then it said, and if you're going on the way, as opposed to a chasan. Why is a chasan exempt? Why is a groom exempt? Because he's involved in a mitzvah. Well, didn't we already say that if you're involved in a mitzvah, then you're exempt? So why do we need a second drasha to teach me that chasan is also exempt? So to this Rashi explained earlier in the Masechta. We had this already back on Daf Yud Aleph, and there Rashi explained, page on 11a, that you wouldn't have known about a chasan, because a chasan, we're not talking about that he's actively involved in the mitzvah approval. He's preparing for it. If you just had the first drasha, b'shivtecha b'veisecha, when you're sitting in your house, as opposed to if you're involved in a mitzvah, I would have said if you're actually involved in the mitzvah, then you're exempt. But if you're just thinking about the mitzvah, you're just preparing for the mitzvah, then you're not exempt. That's what I would have thought. That's what's added, b'lechtecha v'derech, you're going on the way, as opposed to a chasan, somebody who's even just thinking about the mitzvah. As long as they're tarid, as long as it's something that really requires thought, so then they'll be exempt. But if they're marrying a widow, it's not as much thought, not as much of their mind that has to be on it, so then they're not exempt. Ask the Gemara, the third line down on Tezayin Amavez on 16b, I mishum tirda, if the reason you're exempt is because you're tarad, your thoughts are very involved, afilu tavas vinaso bayam nami. So then if your ship sinks at sea, you should be exempt because it's taking over your thoughts. So alama amar Rabbi Abba bar Zavda amar Rav, why is it that Rabbi Abba bar Zavda saying to Rav, Avel chayev b'chol mitzvos amurus b'Torah, that an Avel, a mourner, is obligated in all the mitzvahs in the Torah, chutz me'at tefillin, except for one exception, tefillin, on the first day of Avelos, shari nemar b'hen pe'er, because it says regarding tefillin, it calls them pe'er, shnemar pe'er chachavu shalecha, pasuk in Yechezkel, it says that your splendor, meaning your tefillin, is upon you, and basically it says that Yechezkel, when he was in mourning, he was to wear tefillin, but we infer that normally an Ava would not wear tefillin. That's specifically on the first day of Avelos, on the day of the burial. So, but what do we see? It says that in general, a mourner is obligated in all the mitzvahs, including Kriya Shema. Why? He's so tired. His mind is, of course, so focused on the. It's so captured by his sense of mourning. So if the reason you're exempt is because of tirda, because your mind is involved, so if your ship drowns, sinks, or you're in Avelos during mourning, you should be exempt. So the Gemara says, no, it's different. Amri hasam tirda derishus, hacha tirda de mitzvah. Somewhat of an obvious distinction, but there it's not a mitzvah tirda. You're not involved in thinking about a mitzvah. Then you're obligated still. You have to set aside your thoughts and do the mitzvah. But and do the mitzvah of Shema. If the thoughts that a person is involved in are not doing a mitzvah, not the thoughts of preparing for a mitzvah, so then they are still obligated to say Shema. But if the thoughts that they're involved in are in the preparation to do a mitzvah, so then they're exempt from Shema. Okay. Next Mishnah. So the Mishnah is continuing to tell us about Rabbi Gamliel, who it spoke about in the previous Mishnah, and the Mishnah says, Rachatz alayla harishon shemesa ishto. Rabbi Gamliel bathed the first night after his wife died. Amru lo talmidav, his student said to him, Limatana Rabbeinu she'aval asher lirchotz. Rabbi, you taught us that a mourner is not allowed to bathe. So how come you're bathing the night after your wife died? Amar lahem, he said to them, Eini kishar b'nei adam, I'm not like regular people. Istanis ani, I am an istanis. An istanis is someone who's very, very particular. And it seems, we'll see how the Gemara explains it, but he's saying that an istanis, it wouldn't apply to an istanis. Somebody who is very particular about their feeling clean, and they would be uncomfortable, severely uncomfortable, to not bathe, they could bathe the night after they become mourner. We'll see, the Gemara will explain a little bit more. Ukishemes Tavi Avdo. Now another story about Rabbi Gamliel is that when his slave Tavi died, Kibel Olav Tanchumen, he accepted words of Tanchumen, of consolation. Amru lo Talmidav, his student said to him, Limatanu Rabbeinu she'en mekabon Tanchumen ala avadim. You, Rebbe, you taught us that we don't accept words of consolation for an avid, for a slave. The concern is that people might think that the slave wasn't a slave and was a full-fledged Jew, and that would create confusion. So we're not supposed to accept regular, consolation over the death of a slave, and yet he accepted it over Tavi's death. So Amar Lahem, he said to them, Ein Tavi Abdi Kishar Kol Avadim. My slave Tavi was not like regular slaves. Kasher Haya. He was a kasher. He was very unique in his Yiddishkeit, in his practice. He wasn't a full-on Jew, but he was very careful about the halachos that apply to a Eved Kanani, a Canaanite slave. Okay, now the Mishnah tells us another halacha. Chasan imrotza likros kriya shema layla harishon kore. Even though we said a chasan is exempt from reading Shema the first night, if he wants to read it, he may. Rabbi Gamliel says, not so fast. Not anybody who wants to take on the name should take it. In other words, in order to read the Shema, a person has to be on the night of their wedding, when they're tarad b'mitzvah, when they're involved in the mitzvah, they have to be on a certain madrega, a certain level. And Rabbi Gamliel said, not everybody should just say, I could say Shema the night of my wedding. By the way, now the practice is to say it, but Rabbi Gamliel says not anybody should just claim that name that they could say it. It's Rashi later elsewhere explains that it's kind of on Yadayim Beis. It's kind of arrogant to say, I got this one. I'm not going to be distracted by the mitzvah. I could say Shema with kavana, with intent. It's a little bit arrogant. So Rabbi Gamliel says not just anybody should claim that name, that ability. Okay. Says the Gemara, going back to Rabbi Gamliel, who bathed the night after his wife's death. My taima de Rabbi Gamliel, what was his reason? Kasavar, because he held aninos layla derabanan, that the concept of aninos, of being an onain, the night after the death of somebody, is only midirabanan. Dichsiv, because the pasuk says ve'acharisa kiyomar. So this is a pasuk in Amos, and it talks about Avelos, and talks about mourning, and it says that the end is like a bitter day. And we learn from there that the day of the person's end is a bitter day. So what we have is a concept of Avelos, Aninos, that's D'Oraisa, that's Torah, on a Torah level, on the day of the person's death. Now the most practical, not exactly practical, but what on a Torah level, what difference does that make? So it's actually a pasuk in the Torah. It says, "Lo achalti ve'oni." By Meiser, it says, "I didn't eat as an oni," which means as an onain. Onain is on the day of death. So a person's not allowed to eat Meiser on the day that they become a mourner. That's the Torah application of aninus. I'm not sure if there are any others. But that introduces this concept of a day of mourning. And we, of course, extend Shiva. But the question is, on the day that the person dies, what's the story with that night that follows? Is the person a mourner for, I guess, the day and the night that follows? Or do we say if the person died in the daytime, at the end of that day, the Torah level aninus ends? And this is a machokas. It's a dispute. And Rabbi Gamliel holds that on a Torah level it ends at night. And since on a Torah level it ends at night, so then already in the evening, lakum istinus logazr be'rabanan, since it's only rabbinic come the nighttime, the morning and the nighttime, even on the first day, is only rabbinic. So the rabbis weren't gozer, they didn't decree that, even though they decree a person shouldn't bathe during Shiva, during mourning, but for an istinus, for somebody who's very, very particular, it's a great, severely troubles them not to bathe, so then the Gzeira was never said. The Gzeira, the decree doesn't apply, and that's why Rabbi Gamliel, already on that first night after his wife died, he bathed. Okay. Then we said in the Mishnah, Shemes Tavi Avda, when Tavi, his slave, died, he accepted Tanchuming, he accepted consolation. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Avadim u'shvachos in omding aleim b'shura. So at a funeral, there's a practice that when, after the burial, the mourners walk in between a line of the consolers, and that's already comes from the Gemara. It's called the Shura. And the Brisa says that for avadim and shvachos, for slaves and maidservants, Canaanite slaves and maidservants who die, we don't do a Shura for them. We don't do this lineup where we console the mourners. We also don't say the bracha of Avelim. There is a bracha that Avelim would say. Again, I believe the practice is not to say anymore, but there was a bracha that mourners would say. V'tanchume Avelim. We also don't console them, console the mourners. Fine. And like I mentioned before, the reason is because we don't want it to look like they weren't slaves, that they were actually full-fledged Jews. That would be bad for keeping track of people's halachic status. Maisa u'meisa shefchaso shel Rabbi Eliezer. It happened that the maidservant of Rabbi Eliezer died. Nichnesu tamidav l'nachama. His students came to console him. You're not supposed to console somebody for the death of their maidservant, of their Canaanite maidservant. Kivan shiro osam, when Rabbi Eliezer saw them, ala le'aliyah, he went upstairs to try to avoid them, because you're not supposed to console him for that. Now they followed him up. Nichnas la'anpilon. He then went into the anpilon, which is some kind of little entrance house to the bigger house. Nichnasu achrav. They went after him. Nichnas l'trakan. Then he entered the trakan, which is the palace, the large house. Nichnasu achrav. They followed after him. Amar lehem, he said to them, you don't get the hint? Kamaduma nishatem nichvim beposhim. I thought that you would get burned by warm water. Meaning, I thought a little hint. I run away, you get the hint. You get burned already from the warm water, from the little hint. Achshav, but now yatem nichma filu b'chami chamin. But now even in the hottest waters, you're not getting burned. Even the most open hint, you're not getting the point. Lo kach shanisim lachem. Didn't I teach you? Avadim u'shvachos in omni aleim b'shura. For slaves and maidservants, we don't stand in the line to console the mourners. And we don't say the bracha of mourners. And we don't do consolations. So what do we say? What can we say? Just like we say if somebody has an ox or a donkey that dies, we say Hashem should fill what you've lost. That's what we would say if somebody lost an expensive possession. Kach omer malal avdav al shivchaso. So too, that's what we say if somebody loses their slave or their maidservant, even though they might have had a very personal connection to them, and we might think that a higher level of consolation would be in order. No, we don't want people to get, like I said, we don't want people to get the wrong idea as to their status. So what we say is, Hamakom Yimalecha Chesroncha, the omnipresent one Hashem should fill what you've lost. Tanya Yidach, we have a different price, though. It says, Avadim Mishvachos Eng Maspiding Osan. That for slaves and maidservants, we don't say a hesped, we don't eulogize. Rabbi Yossi Omer, but Rabbi Yossi says, Im Eved Kasherhu, if he was a kasher, if he was a righteous slave, so Omrim Alav, we say to him, Hai, whoa, Ish Tov V'neman. He was a good and trustworthy person, V'nenem Yigio, and he benefited from his hard work. That's what we could say. Amrulo, but then the other rabbi said to Rabbi Yossi, King, if you're going to say that about a slave, what kind of praise have you left for regular righteous people? That's a pretty good eulogy for somebody. And you haven't left anything for everybody else, for the non-slaves. So they were against that. I think, again, in the backdrop, the concern is that that's as good as most people will get. And again, that will lead us to think that this was not a slave. It was and it would affect it could cause confusion and drastic mistakes with regards to the yichos, the lineage of this person. Okay. Tana Rabbi and the Rabbi talking a braysa. Ein karan avos elo l'shlosha. There's only three people we can refer to as the avos. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. They are our forefathers. Ve'ein karan imahos elo la'arba. And we only refer to four women as the imahos, as the mothers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. My time. What's the reason for this? So if the reason is because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov we know is our forefather, but once you get to past Yaakov, you have 12 shvatim. We don't know we don't know which sheva everyone comes from, so you can't call them avos because they're not your father necessarily. Only you can know that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are your forefathers, but after that you don't know. Well, if that was the case, if that was the reason, if that was so, imahos nami lo yadina. Well, we don't know who your mothers are. We don't all come from Rachel and Leah. We come from either Rachel or Leah, each of us. Ime Rachel kasinan, ime Leah kasinan. Right? Because yes, we all come from Sarah. Yes, we all come from Rivka. But then we have Rachel and Leah. Yaakov had multiple wives. So it can't be that the reason why we only can call the forefathers avos, but not past that avos, is because of this, because we wouldn't know who the fathers are. You can't refer to the shvatim as avos because they're not all our fathers, because then by that logic we couldn't refer to Rachel and Leah as imahos because they're not all our mothers. So, or neither of them is, only one of them could be each of our ancestors. So, rather, adhacha chashivit, tefelo chashivit. The reason is because these are the most chashav. These are the most significant, important. Yes, the shvatim, the tribes, the brothers were very significant too, but these are our avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and these are our imahos. But it's not because we directly descend from them. They are the chashav ones. Now, the point to bring this in, we'll see in a moment. The idea is that's calling somebody an av or an ima is an expression of chashivos, of importance, of significance. And that's why it seems relevant over here. Because now the Gemara says, Tanya Yidach, we have another braysa. Avadim ushvachos, slaves and maidservants, ein karing osam abba ploni v'ima plonis. You don't call them abba and ima. Now, abba and ima, in the times of the Gemara, were not just a term for parents, but it was a term of somebody who's chashav, somebody who's special and unique, even if they weren't your father or mother. But you can't apply such a title to a slave or a maidservant, because again, that would make them look maybe like they're too. I think the reason is because it would make them look like they have yichus, they have lineage. B'shalom Rabbi Gamliel hayukarim osam Abba Ploni v'ima Plonis. But for Rabbi Gamliel, they would call his slaves and maidservants Abba Ima, Abba Ploni, Ima Plonis. So fine, that's the brisa. Says the Gemara Maisa, this story, you're bringing a story to contradict. It says don't call them, but Rabbi Gamliel called them that. Or the people called Rabbi Gamliel's slaves that. The Gemara answers Mishum D'Chashiv, that's because they were very chashiv, they were very significant. But in general, we don't want to refer to slaves and maidservants as Abba Ploni or Ima Plonis. Okay, now the Gemara returns to Shema and tells us something about Shema. It says, Amar Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar said, Mai dichsiv. What is the meaning of the pasuk in Tehillim? It says, King avarechecha b'chaye, so I will bless you in my life. B'shimcha esa kapai, in your name I will raise my hands. So, explains the Gemara, King avarechecha b'chaye, so I will bless you in my life, zu Kriya Shema. That's a reference to Kriya Shema. The Maharsha explains that the Kriya Shema is about learning Torah, and B'chaya, with my life, Torah is Chaim, Torah is Chaim, is Torah of life. That's where the allusion is. I will bless you regarding my life, I guess, regarding Torah, and that's Shema. B'shimcha esakat, by your name I will raise my hands. Tefillah, that's you raise your hands in prayer. The Mosa King, and if a person does this, the next verse in Tehillim says, Allah HaKasav Omer, about him, and the verse says, Kimo chelev v'vadeshen tispa nafshi, like fats and other types of fats, my soul will be satisfied. So a person is promised, I guess, satisfaction. And not only that, but they inherit, if they say Shema and they daven, they inherit both worlds, Olam Hazeh, Olam Haba, this world and the next. Shneimar Usfasai, the end of that next, V'sifsei Renanos Yahal Pi, the lips of song, plural, my mouth will praise, and it's multiple Renanos. It's two different songs, one for the good of this world and one for the good of the next world. So a person who says these things, person who Osa King, a person who does this, merits this world and the next. Okay, now the Gemara shifts. It's something else about Rebbe Lazar, who we just quoted. Now it's something relating to Tefillah. Rebbe Lazar, Basar de Mesayim Tzlose Amar Hachi. After Rebbe Lazar would finish Shemona Esrei, he would say the following: Yiratim Lefanecha Hashem Elokeinu. It should be your will, Hashem, our God. Shetishkan b'pureino ava ve'achva v'shalom v'reis. That you should cause to dwell in our lot love and brotherhood, peace and friendship. V'tarbe gvuleinu b'talmidim, and you should fill our borders with students. V'tatzliach sofeinu achris v'tikva, and our end should see success, and our hopes should be fulfilled. It should be a good end with our hopes fulfilled. V'tasim chalkeinu b'gan Eden, and you should give our portion, place our portion in the Garden of Eden. V'sakneinu b'chaver tov, and establish for us, acquire for us a good friend, v'yetzer tov, and a good inclination, b'olamcha, in your world, v'nashkim, and we should awaken each day, I think, v'nimtza yichol v'vaveinu, we should find that which our heart hopes for, v'yira shemecha, to fear your name, to revere your name, v'tavu l'fanecha karas nafsheinu l'tova, and our needs and our spirit should come before you for good. That was the tefillah that Rebbe Lazar would say after he finished Shemona Esrei, sort of as a postscript. Rabbi Yochanan busted the Messiah after he would finish Shemona Esrei, Amar Hachi would say the following: It should be your will, Hashem our God, that you should peer upon our embarrassment, v'tabit b'rasenu, and stare upon the bad that's befallen us. V'tislabish b'rachamecha, you should dress yourself in mercy, v'tiskasa be'azcha, and cover yourself in your might, v'tisaseh b'chasidusecha, and wrap yourself in your chesed, in your kindness, v'tisazeh b'chaninusecha, and gird yourself in your graciousness, v'tavu v'necha midas tuvcha v'sanusecha, and your good and your vasan is like your humility to let things go should come before you, and you should turn our fate around, our lot around, basically. Reb Zera based the Messiah Tzlusei Amar Hachi. Reb Zera, when he would finish his Shemona Esrei, he would say the following: it should be your will, Hashem our God, that we not sin, and we not be embarrassed, and not be disgraced, from our fathers. The way we live should live up to the standards of our fathers. Reb Chia Basar Damatzli Amar Hachi. Reb Chia, after he davened, he would say the following: it should be your will before you, Hashem our God, that your Torah should be our trade, and our heart shouldn't be sad, and our eyes shouldn't be darkened. Rab Basar Tzlusei Amar Hachi. Rab, after he would daven, he would say the following: should be your will, Hashem our God. This is what we say as the Birchas HaChodesh, very similar. It's based on this. That you give us, should be your will that you give us a long life. Chaim shel shalom, a life of peace. Chaim shel tova, a life of good. Chaim shel bracha, a life of blessing. Chaim shel parnasa, a life of livelihood. Chaim shel chilutz atzamos, a life of strong bones. A life that has fear of sin. A life that does not have embarrassment and disgrace. A life of wealth and honor. A life that has love of Torah and fear of heaven. A life where you fulfill for us all of the requests of our hearts for good. Rabbi Basar Tzosei, Rabbi Yudanasi, after he would daven, Amar Hachi would say the following: it should be your will before you, Hashem our God, and the God of our forefathers, that you should save us from the azepanim, those who have azus. They have what's the word? Oh, the word is slipping me. Boldness. They're brazen. That's the word. From those who are brazen against us, and that we shouldn't. They shouldn't give us like a bad name. Me'adam ra, from evil people. Me'pegara, and from bad wounds or hits. Yetzara, from a bad inclination. Mechavara, from a bad friend. Mishachira, from a bad neighbor. Misatan hamashkas, and from the Satan who destroys. Umidin kasha, and from a difficult judgment. Umibal din kasha, and from a difficult baldin, somebody who's coming out against us in a case. A litigant, bein shu ben bris, whether it's a member of the covenant, a Jew, bein shu eino ben bris, whether it's not a Jew. This is what Rabbi would say. And he would say this even though he had guards. So, to protect him, still he would daven for protection, because even when somebody has what appears to be protection, really protection comes from Hashem. So he still daven to be protected from bad people and bad damage, bad neighbors, etc. Okay, and that is actually taken and used in the morning brachos. So it's not said after Shemona Esrei, but it is said in the morning brachos. The Gemara will continue to quote different things that people would say, and we'll see eventually that what we actually say in Shemona Esrei at the end, as our postscript, is actually also found in the Gemara, but we'll save that for next time.